Sarah Mitchell had always been the kind of person who pushed herself beyond what others thought possible. Growing up in a small town in Montana, she watched her father work construction and her mother manage their household with military precision. They taught her that hard work was the only currency that mattered in life. When she turned 18, Sarah made a decision that shocked everyone who knew her. She enlisted in the Navy. The day she arrived at boot camp, reality hit her like a cold wave. The drill instructors screamed orders before the sun rose. The physical demands were crushing. Sarah found herself surrounded by recruits who seemed stronger, faster, and more prepared than she was. Every morning began with a run that left her legs burning. Every afternoon brought obstacle courses that tested her grip, strength, and determination. Every evening ended with her collapsing onto her bunk, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. Other recruits noticed her struggling. Some offered encouragement. Others whispered that she would never make it through the program. Sarah heard the doubts but tried to block them out. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other. When her muscles screamed for rest, she reminded herself why she joined. She wanted to prove something, not just to her hometown but to herself. The underwater training was the worst. Sarah had never been comfortable in deep water. As a child, she nearly drowned in a lake during a family camping trip. The memory haunted her every time she entered the pool. The instructors made them swim laps with full gear. They had to hold their breath underwater for extended periods. They practiced escaping from simulated aircraft that had crashed into the ocean. Each exercise brought Sarah face to face with her deepest fear. One afternoon, during a particularly brutal training session, Sarah panicked underwater. Her lungs burned for air. Her vision started to tunnel. She kicked frantically toward the surface, breaking protocol and failing the exercise. The instructor pulled her aside afterward. His face was stern but not unkind. He told her that fear was normal, but letting it control her actions could get people killed in real situations. Sarah nodded, holding back tears, knowing he was right. That night, she sat alone in the barracks while other recruits socialized or rested. She wrote a letter to her parents but never mailed it. In the letter, she admitted that she was scared. She confessed that every day felt like an uphill battle. She wrote that she was not sure if she belonged in the military. But as she finished writing, something shifted inside her. She crumpled the letter and threw it away. Quitting was not an option she could live with. The weeks turned into months. Sarah gradually improved, but never enough to stand out. She remained in the middle of the pack during most exercises. Her run times got better, but others still finished ahead of her. Her shooting accuracy improved, but she was not the best marksman. She learned to accept that she might never be the top recruit, but she could be the one who never gave up. During one training evolution, the group had to carry heavy equipment across several miles of rough terrain. Sarah volunteered to carry one of the heavier loads. Halfway through, her shoulders felt like they were on fire. Her back ached with every step. A fellow recruit offered to switch with her, but Sarah refused. She had something to prove to herself. When they finally reached the end point, she dropped the equipment and bent over, gasping for air. The instructor walked past and gave her a slight nod. It was the first real acknowledgement she had received. As graduation from boot camp approached, Sarah felt both relief and uncertainty. She had survived the initial training, but she knew this was just the beginning. The Navy had many paths and she needed to choose one. Some recruits were heading to technical schools. Others were going to ships. Sarah had heard whispers about special operations programs, but those seemed far beyond her capabilities. She assumed she would end up in a regular assignment, doing support work somewhere safe. Then one day, a different kind of instructor appeared at their training facility. He was older than the others, with weathered features and quiet confidence. He did not yell or intimidate. Instead, he observed the recruits during their exercises. Sarah noticed him watching her during an obstacle course run. She stumbled on one section but got back up quickly and finished. When she walked past him afterward, he was taking notes. She had no idea what that meant. The following week, Sarah received an unexpected summons to an administrative office. She walked in nervously, wondering if she had done something wrong. Behind the desk sat the same instructor who had been observing them. He introduced himself simply as Commander Hayes. He told Sarah that he worked with a specialized unit and was looking for candidates with specific qualities. Sarah felt confused. She knew she was not the strongest or fastest recruit. Why would he be interested in her? Commander Hayes explained that his unit valued determination and mental resilience over raw physical talent. He had watched Sarah struggle and keep going. He had seen her face her fears and push through anyway. Those qualities, he said, were harder to teach than shooting accuracy or running speed. He offered her a chance to try out for a specialized training program. Sarah sat in stunned silence. This was an opportunity she never imagined receiving. She asked what the program entailed. Commander Hayes was honest. It would be significantly harder than anything she had experienced so far. Many candidates quit within the first week. The failure rate was extremely high. Even if she made it through the training, there was no guarantee of success in the field. But if she was willing to push herself further than she thought possible, he would give her the chance. Sarah felt her heart pounding. Every logical part of her brain screamed that she was not ready. But something deeper, something stubborn and fierce made her answer yes. The specialized training program began on a Monday morning that felt colder than any Sarah had experienced. She arrived at a remote facility surrounded by dense forest and mountains. The other candidates looked intimidating. Most were men who seemed carved from stone, with muscular builds and confident expressions. There were only 3 other women in the group of 40 candidates. Sarah immediately felt out of place. Commander Hayes gathered everyone in a large training hall. He explained the basic structure of the program. They would spend 12 weeks learning advanced combat techniques, survival skills, tactical planning, and specialized operations procedures. The training would test them physically, mentally, and emotionally. At any point, they could ring a brass bell hanging near the entrance and quit. No one would judge them for it. Hayes made it clear that most people in the room would not finish. The first week was designed to break people. They woke up at 4 in the morning and trained until late at night. The physical demands made boot camp seem easy by comparison. They ran with weighted packs through mountain trails. They swam in freezing cold water. They crawled through mud pits under barbed wire while instructors fired weapons overhead. Sarah felt her body screaming in protest every single day. By the end of the first week, 8 people had quit. One woman rang the bell after a particularly grueling swim session. Sarah watched her walk away and felt both sympathy and fear. How long before she would be doing the same thing? Every night, Sarah collapsed into her bunk with muscles that felt shredded. She developed blisters that became infected. She lost weight rapidly because her body was burning more calories than she could consume. The second week introduced combat training that was far more intense than anything Sarah had learned before. They practiced hand-to-hand fighting with instructors who showed no mercy. Sarah took hits that left bruises covering her arms and ribs. She learned to use various weapons with precision. The instructors pushed them to react instantly under pressure. Hesitation, they were told, could mean death in the field. During one combat drill, Sarah was paired with one of the largest male candidates. He outweighed her by at least 80 pounds. The exercise required them to spar until one person was pinned. Sarah knew she could not match his strength directly. She tried using speed and technique, but he caught her arm and slammed her to the mat hard. The impact knocked the wind out of her. She lay there gasping while the instructor watched impassively. He told her to get up and try again. Sarah struggled to her feet. Her ribs ached where she had hit the ground. The large candidate looked almost apologetic, but he would not hold back when the instructor ordered them to continue. This time, Sarah tried a different approach. She waited for him to come forward, then used his momentum against him, sweeping his leg while pushing his shoulder. He stumbled but did not fall. Before he could recover, she moved behind him and attempted a chokehold she had learned. It was not perfect, but it was enough to show the instructor she was thinking strategically. The weeks blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and pain. Sarah watched more candidates ring the bell and leave. Each departure made her more determined to stay. She formed a quiet bond with the other remaining women. They never spoke about quitting, only about getting through the next exercise, the next day, the next week. They shared tips for managing pain and treating injuries. They encouraged each other during the darkest moments. One of the most challenging exercises came during the 6th week. The candidates had to complete a 72-hour field training mission with almost no sleep. They were dropped in a remote area with minimal supplies and given objectives to complete. They had to navigate difficult terrain, avoid simulated enemy patrols, and reach specific checkpoints, all while carrying heavy equipment and operating on pure willpower. Sarah was placed in a team with 4 other candidates. They quickly realized they needed to work together to survive. During the second night, Sarah was on watch while the others rested for a brief period. She fought to keep her eyes open. Her body begged for sleep. Hallucinations started creeping in at the edges of her vision. She saw shapes moving in the darkness that were not really there. She dug her fingernails into her palm to stay alert. When her team encountered a simulated enemy position, they had to decide whether to engage or avoid it. Sarah suggested a route that would take them around the position, but would add several miles to their journey. Another team member wanted to attempt a direct assault to save time. They argued in harsh whispers. Finally, they voted and decided to take Sarah's suggested route. It was the right call. They later learned that teams who tried the direct assault had failed the exercise. By the time they reached the final checkpoint, Sarah was operating on instinct alone. Her feet were covered in blisters that had burst and reformed. Her shoulders were rubbed raw from the pack straps. She could barely think clearly. But when the instructor confirmed they had completed the mission successfully, she felt a surge of pride that cut through the exhaustion. The training continued to push new boundaries. They learned how to gather intelligence in hostile environments. They practiced rapid decision-making under extreme stress. They studied tactics used by special operations forces around the world. Sarah absorbed everything, knowing that this knowledge might keep her alive someday. She filled notebooks with observations and lessons learned. Commander Hayes continued to observe the candidates throughout the program. He rarely offered praise or criticism directly. He watched how people handled failure and success. He noted who helped their teammates and who only looked out for themselves. Sarah noticed him paying particular attention during team exercises. She made sure to support her teammates even when she was struggling herself. During the 10th week, the group faced a psychological evaluation that many found more difficult than the physical challenges. They were placed in high-stress scenarios, designed to test their judgment and emotional control. Instructors screamed contradictory orders at them. They were given impossible decisions with no clear right answer. The goal was to see how they reacted when everything was chaotic and nothing made sense. Sarah surprised herself during these exercises. Something about the chaos felt almost familiar. She had spent so many weeks being uncomfortable and uncertain that she had developed a strange calmness in the midst of confusion. When instructors yelled at her, she filtered out the emotion and listened for the actual information. When faced with impossible choices, she made the best decision she could and committed to it fully. As the final week approached, only 18 candidates remained from the original 40. Sarah was one of only 2 women still in the program. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment but also nervousness about what came next. The training had transformed her body and mind. She was stronger, faster, and more confident than she had ever been. But she still wondered if she truly belonged among these elite operators. The graduation ceremony was simple and private. Commander Hayes shook each candidate's hand and gave them their assignment orders. When Sarah stepped forward, Hayes looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. He told her that she had exceeded every expectation. Her determination and strategic thinking had impressed the entire instructor cadre. Then he handed her an envelope containing her first assignment. Sarah opened it with trembling hands, knowing that whatever came next would define the rest of her career. Sarah's first assignment sent her to a naval base on the East Coast, where she would work with a special operations support unit. She arrived expecting to be thrown immediately into action, but instead found herself in another phase of training. This time the focus was on intelligence gathering, language skills, and cultural understanding. The Navy was preparing her for missions that required more than just physical capability. The support unit consisted of about 20 personnel, each with specialized skills. There were communications experts, intelligence analysts, logistics coordinators, and tactical advisors. Sarah was assigned to work primarily with intelligence operations. Her job involved analyzing information from various sources and helping plan mission parameters. It was not the frontline combat role she had imagined, but it was crucial work. At first, Sarah felt disappointed. After surviving such intense training, she expected something more exciting. Instead, she spent most days in an operations center staring at computer screens and reading reports. She analyzed enemy movement patterns, studied maps of foreign territories, and helped create briefing documents for teams heading into the field. The work was important but felt far removed from the action she craved. Her supervisor was a veteran Navy officer named Lieutenant Chen. He had served multiple tours in various conflict zones and had seen more. combat than Sarah could imagine. Chen recognized her frustration quickly. One afternoon, he pulled her aside and explained something that changed her perspective. He told her that every successful mission depended on good intelligence. The operators in the field relied completely on the information provided by people like Sarah. One mistake in analysis could cost lives. The responsibility was enormous. Sarah began to see her work differently after that conversation. She approached each task with renewed focus. When analyzing enemy positions, she imagined the real people who would use her information. When studying terrain maps, she thought about the teams who would navigate that ground in darkness. She double-checked every detail and questioned assumptions. Her reports became more thorough and accurate. After 3 months in the support role, Sarah developed a reputation for being meticulous and reliable. Teams requested her analysis specifically because they trusted her work. She learned to think like the operators in the field, anticipating what information they would need and providing it clearly. The job became less about excitement and more about excellence. One evening, Commander Hayes visited the base. Sarah had not seen him since graduation from the specialized training program. He was there to brief the unit about an upcoming operation in a hostile region. During his presentation, he outlined the mission objectives and the intelligence requirements. After the briefing, he asked to speak with Sarah privately. They walked to a quiet area outside the operations center. Hayes asked how she was adjusting to the assignment. Sarah answered honestly. She admitted that the work was different from what she expected, but that she had come to appreciate its importance. Hayes nodded approvingly. He told her that he had been receiving positive reports about her performance. Then he said something that caught her off guard. He was putting together a small team for a sensitive operation overseas, and he wanted her to be part of it. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Hayes explained that the mission required someone who could perform intelligence work in the field, not from a safe operations center. The team would be operating in a dangerous area with limited support. They needed someone who could analyze situations in real time and make critical decisions under pressure. He believed Sarah had the skills and temperament for the job, but it would be more dangerous than anything she had done before. Sarah did not hesitate. She accepted the assignment immediately. Hayes told her she would have 2 weeks to prepare before deployment. He provided her with classified briefing materials and told her to study everything carefully. The mission involved supporting local Allied forces in a region where hostile groups operated freely. The team would be small, mobile, and often isolated from conventional military support. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah spent hours studying the language and culture of the region. She memorized maps and intelligence reports. She trained with the weapons and equipment she would carry. She also met the other members of Hayes' team. There were 5 of them in total, including Hayes. Each person brought specific expertise. Sarah was the only woman on the team. The team members were professional but somewhat reserved. Sarah could tell they were evaluating her, wondering if she could keep up with them in a combat environment. She did not take it personally. She knew she had to prove herself through actions, not words. During training exercises, she focused on doing her job well and supporting the team effectively. One team member, a SEAL operator named Marcus, was particularly skeptical. He had been in special operations for over a decade and had never worked with a woman in the field. He did not say anything disrespectful, but Sarah could sense his doubt. During one training scenario, they had to navigate through a simulated hostile area together. Sarah spotted a threat that Marcus missed. She calmly pointed it out and suggested a route adjustment. Marcus acknowledged it with a grunt, but she noticed him watching her more carefully after that. The day of deployment arrived faster than Sarah expected. They flew on a military transport to a forward operating base in the Middle East. The heat hit Sarah like a physical force when she stepped off the plane. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, all sand and rocks under a merciless sun. The base was sparse with temporary buildings and defensive barriers. Everything was functional with no wasted space or comfort. Commander Hayes gathered the team for a final briefing. He reviewed their objectives and the rules of engagement. They would be embedded with a local military unit that was conducting operations against insurgent groups. The team's role was to provide tactical advice, help coordinate actions, and gather intelligence about enemy movements. It was a support mission, but the danger was very real. The area had seen frequent attacks and casualties. Sarah felt her stomach tighten with nervousness, but also with anticipation. This was why she had joined the Navy. This was why she had pushed through all the pain and doubt during training. She checked her equipment one more time, making sure everything was secure and accessible. Her weapon felt heavy but reassuring in her hands. They left the base in armored vehicles before dawn the next morning. The convoy moved through narrow roads with buildings close on both sides. Sarah scanned the windows and rooftops looking for threats. Her training had taught her what to look for, but seeing it in real context was different. Every shadow could hide danger. Every pile of debris could conceal an explosive device. The local military unit they were supporting operated from a small compound in a contested town. When the team arrived, they were greeted by the unit commander, a veteran soldier who looked exhausted. He welcomed the Americans, but was clearly skeptical about whether they would actually be useful. Hayes established rapport quickly, speaking through an interpreter and showing genuine respect for the local forces. Sarah set up her equipment in a corner of the compound's operations room. She had communications gear, computers, and maps spread across a table. Her job was to monitor intelligence feeds, track enemy movements, and provide real-time information to both the team and the local forces. It required constant vigilance and quick analysis. The first few days were relatively quiet. Sarah adjusted to the rhythm of operations in the compound. She listened to radio chatter, studied surveillance imagery, and built a picture of the area's threat landscape. She identified patterns in enemy activity and shared her findings with Commander Hayes. The local forces began to trust her analysis when her predictions proved accurate. On the fourth night, everything changed. Sarah was monitoring communications when she intercepted chatter that suggested an attack was being planned. The language was coded, but she had studied similar patterns in training. She immediately alerted Commander Hayes. He reviewed her analysis and agreed that the threat was credible. They needed to warn the local forces and prepare defenses. The compound erupted into activity. Soldiers moved to defensive positions. Weapons were checked and loaded. Sarah continued monitoring the communications, trying to determine when and where the attack would come from. The tension was suffocating. Everyone waited in the darkness, knowing that violence could explode at any moment. Sarah forced herself to breathe steadily and focus on her job. This was the moment everything had been preparing her for. The attack began just after midnight with the sound of explosions in the distance. Sarah felt the compound shake as mortars landed somewhere nearby. The radio channels lit up with urgent communications. Local soldiers shouted to each other while taking positions along the walls. Commander Hayes moved calmly through the chaos, coordinating with the unit commander and directing his team. Sarah stayed focused on her equipment, filtering through the flood of information coming from multiple sources. She identified 3 likely positions where the attackers were launching mortars from. She marked them on a digital map and sent the information to Hayes. He glanced at her screen, nodded, and immediately relayed the coordinates to the local forces who had counter-battery capabilities. The compound's defensive weapons opened fire, sending rounds toward the enemy positions. The noise was deafening. Sarah had trained with live fire before, but this was different. This was real combat with real consequences. She felt fear trying to creep in but pushed it aside. Her team and the local soldiers needed her to keep working. Marcus appeared at her side, crouching low. He asked if she had any updates on enemy movements. Sarah showed him the map with the marked positions and explained what she was tracking. He studied it quickly and asked smart questions about her confidence level in the data. She answered clearly and directly. Marcus grabbed a radio and coordinated with another team member based on her information. For the first time, Sarah felt like she was truly part of the team. The fighting continued for over an hour. Several times, Sarah identified new threats and passed the information up the chain. Her analysis helped the defenders prioritize their response. When the mortars finally stopped, everyone remained on high alert. Hayes ordered the team to maintain defensive positions in case there was a second wave of attacks. Sarah's hands were shaking from adrenaline, but she kept them steady on her keyboard. She continued monitoring communications, listening for any indication that another attack was coming. The night dragged on with excruciating slowness. Every sound outside the compound made her tense, but gradually as dawn approached, the situation calmed. The attack appeared to be over. Commander Hayes gathered his team for a quick assessment. Everyone had performed well under fire. No one on the team or among the local forces had been seriously injured. The defensive response had been effective, partly because of Sarah's early warning and accurate targeting information. Hayes did not offer elaborate praise, but he looked at Sarah and said simply that she had done good work. Coming from him, that meant everything. Over the following weeks, the team settled into a routine punctuated by moments of intense danger. They conducted patrols with local forces, gathered intelligence from informants, and planned operations against insurgent positions. Sarah proved herself repeatedly, providing critical analysis that helped keep people alive. The initial skepticism from team members faded as they saw her consistent performance. One afternoon, Hayes called Sarah into a private briefing. He explained that they had received intelligence about a high-value target operating in a nearby area. This insurgent leader had been responsible for multiple attacks against both local forces and civilians. Capturing or eliminating him would significantly disrupt enemy operations in the region. Hayes was planning a mission, and he wanted Sarah's assessment of the intelligence. Sarah spent the next 2 days analyzing everything available about the target. She studied his known associates, his movement patterns, and the locations where he had been spotted. The intelligence was fragmented and sometimes contradictory. She had to piece together a coherent picture from incomplete information. It was like solving a complex puzzle where some pieces might be deliberately misleading. She identified 3 locations where the target was most likely to appear based on the pattern analysis. She rated each location by probability and explained her reasoning in a detailed briefing document. When she presented her findings to Hayes, he asked penetrating questions that tested her assumptions. Sarah defended her analysis where she was confident, but also acknowledged the uncertainties. Hayes appreciated her honesty about what they did not know. The mission was scheduled for 3 days later. It would involve a joint operation with local special forces. The plan was to conduct simultaneous raids on 2 of the locations Sarah had identified. Hayes's team would accompany the local forces to provide support and coordination. Sarah would remain at the compound to provide real-time intelligence support during the operation. The night before the mission, Sarah could not sleep. She kept reviewing her analysis, questioning whether she had missed something important. What if she was wrong about the locations? What if her assessment led the team into a trap? The weight of responsibility felt crushing. She thought about the men who would be risking their lives based partly on her work. Marcus found her in the operations room late that night. He could tell she was worried. He sat down and told her something that helped. He said that in special operations they never had perfect information. Every mission involved risk and uncertainty. What mattered was making the best decisions possible with the information available. Sarah had done that. Now they had to execute and adapt. Whatever happened, it would not be because she had not done her job well. The mission launched in the early morning hours. Sarah monitored the radio channels as the teams moved into position. She tracked their progress on her maps and stood ready to provide any additional information they might need. The tension was unbearable. She heard the teams report that they were approaching the target locations. Then there was radio silence as they prepared to breach. The first location turned out to be a dry hole. The target was not there, though they found evidence he had been there recently. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Had she gotten it wrong? But then the second team reported contact. They had found the target at the other location. A firefight erupted. Sarah listened to the radio chatter, trying to provide any support she could. She pulled up overhead imagery and warned them about potential escape routes. The firefight was brief but intense. When it ended, the team reported they had successfully captured the target. There were no friendly casualties. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. Her analysis had been correct. The mission was a success. When the teams returned to the compound several hours later, they were exhausted but satisfied. They had accomplished something significant. Commander Hayes debriefed the team and praised the execution. He specifically mentioned Sarah's intelligence work as being instrumental to the success. The local forces were especially pleased. This capture would make a real difference in the security situation. That night, for the first time since deployment, Sarah felt like she truly belonged. She was not just supporting the mission from the sidelines. She was an integral part of the team. The weeks continued with a mix of routine operations and intense moments. Sarah grew more confident in her abilities and more comfortable working in the harsh environment. She learned to read situations quickly and make decisions with limited information. The team operated like a well-oiled machine, with each person trusting the others completely. One day, Commander Hayes received new orders. The team would be moving to a different area where the situation was even more unstable. Intelligence suggested that insurgent groups were planning a major offensive. The team's mission would be to help local forces disrupt those plans. It would be more dangerous than anything they had done so far. Sarah prepared for the move with the same thoroughness she brought to everything. She studied the new area, learned about the local dynamics, and reviewed intelligence reports. She also spent time reflecting on how much she had changed since joining the Navy. The scared young woman who struggled through boot camp seemed like a different person. She had been tested repeatedly and had proven to herself that she could handle whatever came. The night before they moved to the new area, Hayes called Sarah aside. He told her that he had been impressed with her performance throughout the deployment. She had exceeded his expectations in every way. But he also warned her that the next phase would be even more challenging. The area they were heading to had seen heavy fighting. The risks would be higher. He needed to know that she was ready. Sarah looked at Commander Hayes and answered without hesitation. She was ready. She had trained for this. She had proven herself in combat. Whatever came next, she would handle it. Hayes nodded, satisfied. He told her to get some rest. They would move out at dawn. As Sarah walked back to her quarters, she felt a quiet confidence. She had come a long way from that training pool where she had panicked and failed. Now she was heading into greater danger, but she was no longer afraid. She was prepared. The new area was more volatile than anywhere Sarah had operated before. The team arrived at a forward operating base that was essentially a fortified compound surrounded by hostile territory. The local forces here were stretched thin, constantly responding to attacks and trying to maintain some semblance of security. The atmosphere was tense from the moment they arrived. Commander Hayes quickly established communication with the local military leadership. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Insurgent groups had been coordinating attacks with increasing sophistication. Intelligence suggested they were planning something big, possibly a coordinated assault on multiple government positions. The local forces were desperate for help, but also wary of foreign involvement. Sarah set up her operations area in a cramped room with unreliable power. She had to work with equipment that frequently malfunctioned due to dust and heat. The intelligence picture was murky. There were multiple insurgent groups operating in the area, some cooperating and others competing. Sorting through the information to find actionable intelligence was like navigating through fog. The first week was frustrating. Sarah collected data but struggled to identify clear patterns. The insurgents were being careful, using communication methods that were difficult to intercept. She worked long hours, often going 20 hours without real sleep. The stress began to wear on everyone. Small tensions emerged within the team as exhaustion accumulated. One night, Sarah was analyzing communication intercepts when she noticed something unusual. There was a subtle pattern in the timing of certain transmissions. It was not obvious, but when she plotted them on a timeline, she saw a possible coordination signal. She dug deeper. Cross-referencing with movement reports from patrols, a picture began to emerge of a network coordinating across the region. She brought her findings to Commander Hayes at 2 a.m. He was tired but listened carefully as she explained her analysis. She had identified what appeared to be a command node, a location where coordination was happening. It was not the typical insurgent hideout. It appeared to be in an area that was considered relatively safe, which was why it had been overlooked. Hayes studied her work and asked tough questions. How confident was she in this assessment? What was the risk that she was seeing patterns that were not really there? Sarah walked him through her methodology and acknowledged the uncertainties. But she believed the pattern was real. If they could act on this intelligence, they might disrupt the planned offensive. Hayes made a decision. He would present the intelligence to the local force commander and recommend a joint operation to investigate the suspected command node. But he emphasized to Sarah that if she was wrong, it would damage the credibility of the entire team. The locals were already skeptical of American intelligence. A failed operation based on her analysis would make future cooperation much harder. The pressure Sarah felt was immense. She went back to her workspace and reviewed everything again, looking for flaws in her logic. She could not find any fundamental mistakes, but doubt crept in anyway. What if she was overconfident? What if she was missing something obvious? She thought about the consequences of being wrong and felt sick. The local commander was initially resistant to Hayes's proposal. He had limited resources and could not afford to waste them on uncertain intelligence. But Hayes was persuasive. He explained Sarah's methodology and vouched for her track record. Finally, the local commander agreed to a small reconnaissance mission to the suspected location. If they found evidence supporting Sarah's analysis, they would plan a larger operation. Sarah was not included in the reconnaissance team. She remained at the base monitoring communications and waiting for reports. The hours dragged by with agonizing slowness. She tried to stay busy with other work but could not focus. Everything depended on whether her analysis was correct. When the reconnaissance team finally radioed back, Sarah's hands trembled as she listened. They had found evidence of recent activity at the location. There were signs of a significant presence, more than would be expected for a normal residence. They had also observed suspicious individuals coming and going. The team commander requested permission to continue surveillance. Relief flooded through Sarah, but it was mixed with new anxiety. She had been right about the location, but that only meant the real challenge was ahead. They needed to plan an operation that would successfully target the command node without alerting the insurgents. If the enemy escaped because of poor planning or execution, the opportunity would be lost. Over the next 48 hours, Sarah worked closely with Hayes and the local commanders to develop the operation plan. She provided detailed intelligence about the target area, including likely escape routes and potential defensive positions. She helped identify the optimal timing for the raid, based on observed patterns of activity. Her input was now being taken seriously by everyone involved. The operation was scheduled for the following night. A combined force of local special operations soldiers and Hayes' team would conduct the raid. Sarah would remain at the operations center to provide real-time intelligence support. As the team prepared to launch, Marcus stopped by her workspace. He told her that everyone was counting on her information. Then he said something unexpected. He said he was glad she was on the team. The raid launched in darkness. Sarah monitored multiple communication channels simultaneously, tracking the assault force's progress and watching for any signs that the enemy had been alerted. The team moved quietly into position around the target location. Then they breached and flooded into the building. The radio exploded with urgent communication. There was fighting inside the structure. Sarah's heart pounded as she tried to follow what was happening. The team reported encountering armed resistance. Gunfire was clearly audible over the radio. Then there were shouts and confusion. Sarah felt helpless, unable to do anything but listen. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, the team reported they had secured the location. They had captured several individuals and found significant intelligence materials. There were documents, computers, and communication equipment. It was clearly a command node, just as Sarah had predicted. The operation was a complete success. When the team returned to the base several hours later, they brought back a treasure trove of intelligence. Sarah immediately began processing the captured materials. What she found exceeded everyone's expectations. The documents revealed the structure of the entire insurgent network in the region. There were plans for coordinated attacks on multiple targets. There were lists of operatives in locations of weapons caches. It was the most significant intelligence haul the local forces had achieved in months. Commander Hayes called Sarah into a briefing room where local military leadership had gathered. He asked her to explain what she had found in the captured materials. Sarah stood before the group of senior officers and walked them through her analysis. She pointed out the key elements of the insurgent network and explained how the planned offensive was supposed to unfold. The local commanders listened intently, asking questions and taking notes. After the briefing, the local force commander approached Sarah directly. Through an interpreter, he thanked her for her work. He said that her intelligence had given them a fighting chance to prevent a disaster. Coming from a man who had been initially skeptical of American assistance, the praise meant something profound. Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction that went beyond personal accomplishment. The captured intelligence allowed the local forces to launch a series of follow-on operations. Over the next 2 weeks, they disrupted multiple insurgent cells and prevented the planned offensive. The security situation in the area improved dramatically. Hayes' team played a supporting role in these operations, with Sarah continuing to provide critical analysis that guided tactical decisions. But success brought new challenges. The insurgents realized they had been compromised and began changing their tactics. They became more cautious and harder to track. Sarah had to adapt her methods, looking for new patterns and indicators. The work became a constant chess match, with each side trying to anticipate the other's moves. During this period, Sarah noticed that her relationship with the team had fundamentally changed. They no longer saw her as the newcomer who needed to prove herself. She was simply one of them, a valued member whose skills were essential to their success. Marcus, who had been skeptical at first, now regularly sought her input on tactical planning. The barriers had come down through shared experience and demonstrated competence. One evening, Commander Hayes asked Sarah to take a walk with him around the compound perimeter. They walked in silence for a while, checking the defensive positions and watching the sunset. Finally, Hayes spoke. He told Sarah that their deployment would be ending soon. They would be rotating back to the States within a few weeks. He wanted to know what her plans were for the future. Sarah had not thought much beyond the current mission. She had been so focused on the immediate challenges that long-term planning seemed irrelevant. Hayes told her that she had proven herself to be an exceptional intelligence operator. He could recommend her for advanced training and assignments that would fast-track her career. But he also wanted to make sure that this was the path she wanted to continue on. Sarah thought about the question seriously. The deployment had been physically and mentally exhausting. She had faced danger and experienced fear, but she had also discovered capabilities within herself that she never knew existed. She had made a real difference in a difficult situation. The work was meaningful in a way that few jobs could match. She told Hayes that she wanted to continue on this path. Hayes nodded, satisfied with her answer. He told her that opportunities would be available when they returned. The special operations community was small, and always looking for talented people who had proven themselves in the field. Her performance during this deployment had opened doors, but he also warned her that the work would never get easier. Each mission would bring new challenges and dangers. She needed to be certain this was what she wanted. As they completed the walk and returned to the operations center, Sarah felt clear about her decision. She had started her Navy career uncertain and afraid, struggling through training and wondering if she belonged. Now she knew exactly where she belonged. She had found her purpose in this demanding, dangerous work. She would continue to push herself and accept whatever challenges came next. The final weeks of the deployment passed quickly. The team conducted a few more operations with local forces, each one building on the intelligence they had gathered. Sarah continued to refine her analytical skills and deepen her understanding of the region's complex dynamics. When it was finally time to leave, she felt mixed emotions. Relief at completing a successful deployment, but also a sense of leaving unfinished business. The flight back to the United States felt surreal. Sarah looked around at her teammates, all exhausted but satisfied with what they had accomplished. They had operated in one of the most dangerous areas in the world and made a tangible difference. Lives had been saved because of their work. That knowledge made all the hardship worthwhile. When they landed back at the naval base, there was no crowd waiting or celebration. Special operations work happened quietly, without public recognition. That suited Sarah fine. She did not need external validation. She knew what she and the team had achieved. The real reward was the knowledge that she had proven herself capable of handling the hardest challenges. Commander Hayes held a small debriefing with the team before everyone dispersed. He thanked them for their professionalism and dedication. He told them they had set a high standard for future operations. Then he pulled Sarah aside one more time. He said that her personnel file would reflect her exceptional performance. Opportunities would come her way, but for now she should take some time to rest and process everything she had experienced. Sarah spent the next few weeks on leave, visiting her family in Montana. Her parents were proud but did not fully understand what she had been doing. She could not share the details anyway. They could see that she had changed, though. She carried herself differently, with quiet confidence born from real experience. The uncertain young woman who left for boot camp years ago was gone, replaced by someone who knew her own strength. Sarah returned from leave to find new orders waiting for her. She was being assigned to a joint special operations task force that worked directly with SEAL teams on high-priority missions. It was exactly the kind of opportunity Commander Hayes had mentioned. The assignment would put her in the most demanding operational environment, working with the best operators in the military. She reported to the task force headquarters at a classified location. The facility was larger than she expected, with state-of-the-art technology and personnel from multiple branches of the military. Sarah was one of several intelligence specialists assigned to support the various SEAL teams rotating through operations. She would be working with different teams depending on mission requirements. The pace was intense from day one. The task force ran continuous operations in multiple regions. Intelligence analysts worked around the clock providing support to teams in the field. Sarah found herself processing information about diverse threats, from terrorist networks to hostile state actors. Each mission required quickly understanding new contexts and providing accurate analysis under tight deadlines. She worked alongside other experienced intelligence professionals who had years of operational experience. They welcomed her but also challenged her constantly. In the intelligence world, being wrong could have catastrophic consequences. Her colleagues pushed her to defend her assessments and consider alternative explanations. The environment was demanding but also intellectually stimulating. After a month of working various assignments, Sarah was told she would be the primary intelligence analyst for an upcoming mission with a SEAL team. The team commander was a veteran operator known for being extremely competent, but also difficult to work with. He had high standards and little patience for mistakes. Sarah would need to brief him and his team on the target and operational environment. The mission involved a raid on a compound where a high-value terrorist operative was believed to be hiding. The intelligence was solid but not perfect. There were questions about the target's exact location within the compound and how many other individuals would be present. Sarah spent days analyzing every piece of information available, building the most complete picture possible. When she met the SEAL team commander, a gruff veteran named Lieutenant Commander Stone, he immediately started grilling her with difficult questions. How recent was the intelligence? What was the source reliability? What were the potential complications? Sarah answered each question directly and honestly, acknowledging uncertainties where they existed. Stone seemed satisfied but not impressed. He told her that his team's lives depended on her being right. The pressure was familiar but still intense. Sarah continued refining her analysis up until hours before the mission launched. She identified potential escape routes from the compound that had not been covered in the initial planning. She also noticed a pattern suggesting the target had a regular schedule that could be exploited. She brought these findings to Stone, who incorporated them into the operational plan. The night of the mission, Sarah was in the operations center monitoring multiple feeds. She could see video from drones overhead and hear radio communication from the team. Watching the SEAL team move toward the target was mesmerizing. They operated with precision and coordination that came from years of training and experience. The team breached the compound exactly as planned. Sarah watched the thermal imagery as they cleared room by room. Then something unexpected happened. The target was not in the location where intelligence had predicted. For a terrible moment, Sarah thought she had been wrong. But then the team found a hidden room that had not appeared on the building plans. The target was there, exactly as Sarah had described him based on source reporting. The mission was a complete success. The target was captured along with significant intelligence materials. When the team returned, Lieutenant Commander Stone sought out Sarah. He told her that her analysis had been spot on and that the information about the hidden room had been crucial. It was brief praise, but coming from someone like Stone, it meant everything. Over the following months, Sarah worked with multiple SEAL teams on various missions. Each one brought different challenges and required adapting to different team cultures. Some commanders were easy to work with, others were demanding. But Sarah's reputation grew steadily. Teams started requesting her specifically as their intelligence analyst. She became known as someone who was thorough, honest, and reliable under pressure. During this period, Sarah also continued her own training. She qualified with additional weapon systems and completed advanced tactical courses. She wanted to understand the operator's perspective better, to see missions the way they saw them. The physical training was brutal, but she pushed through it just as she had during her initial qualification. One day, she received an unexpected message. Commander Hayes, who had been promoted since their deployment together, wanted to speak with her. When they met, he got straight to the point. He was putting together a specialized unit for long-term operations in a particularly dangerous region. The mission would last at least 6 months and would involve living and operating in austere conditions with minimal support. He wanted Sarah to be the intelligence lead for the operation. Sarah asked about the details. Hayes explained that the unit would work closely with indigenous forces to counter a growing terrorist threat. They would be establishing relationships, gathering intelligence and conducting operations in an area where the United States had limited presence. It would be dangerous and demanding. The team would be largely on their own, operating independently without the safety net of nearby conventional forces. Hayes told her that she had the choice to decline. The assignment was voluntary and came with significant risks. If she accepted, she would need to undergo additional specialized training before deployment. He needed her answer within 24 hours. Sarah did not need that long. She told Hayes immediately that she was interested, but she asked who else would be on the team. Hayes smiled and said that most of the team would be people she had worked with before, including Marcus and several others from their previous deployment. They were building a team of people who had proven themselves and who worked well together. The specialized training lasted 6 weeks. It focused on cultural skills, advanced communication techniques, and operating with indigenous forces. Sarah learned more about the specific region where they would deploy and the complex political dynamics. She also received medical training for treating combat injuries in situations where evacuation might not be possible. The training brought the team together and allowed them to develop procedures and trust before heading into harm's way. Marcus had become a close friend and trusted colleague. They often worked together on planning scenarios, combining his tactical expertise with her analytical skills. The rest of the team included specialists in communications, weapons, and engineering. Every person brought critical capabilities. Commander Hayes led the team with quiet confidence. He set high standards but also created an environment where people felt comfortable raising concerns or suggesting alternatives. Sarah appreciated his leadership style. He trusted his people but also held them accountable. Under his command, the team developed a strong sense of cohesion and shared purpose. As the deployment date approached, Sarah felt ready but also realistic about the challenges ahead. This mission would be different from anything she had done before. They would be operating in a region where the terrain was unforgiving and the enemy was experienced and ruthless. The team would need to rely on each other completely. There would be no easy way out if things went wrong. The night before they left, Hayes gathered the team for a final briefing. He reviewed the mission objectives and the rules of engagement. He talked about the importance of building relationships with local forces and earning their trust. He emphasized that they were there to support and enable, not to take over. Then he reminded everyone that they had trained for this and were ready. He trusted each person on the team completely. Sarah looked around at her teammates and felt proud to be among them. She had come so far from that first day in boot camp when she wondered if she belonged. Now she was about to deploy on one of the most challenging missions possible, working alongside elite operators who respected her abilities. She had earned her place through determination, skill, and unwavering commitment. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she could handle them. The region where they deployed was mountainous and remote, with small villages scattered across harsh terrain. The team established their base in a fortified compound on the edge of a town that served as a district center. Local military forces operated from an adjacent compound. The arrangement allowed for close cooperation, while maintaining some operational separation. Sarah immediately began the work of understanding the local intelligence landscape. She met with local intelligence officers and started building a network of information sources. The cultural barriers were significant. Many locals were suspicious of Americans and reluctant to share information. Building trust would take time and consistent effort. Commander Hayes had emphasized that their mission was to support and enable local forces, not replace them. Sarah took this guidance seriously. She shared intelligence openly with local counterparts and asked for their insights. She learned to value their understanding of the local context, which was far deeper than anything she could gain from reports and analysis. Over time, relationships began to develop. The team conducted joint patrols with local forces to understand the area better. Sarah accompanied some of these patrols, experiencing firsthand the difficult terrain and the constant vigilance required. The mountains were beautiful but dangerous. Ambushes could come from anywhere. The local soldiers moved with practiced caution, reading the landscape in ways Sarah was still learning. During one patrol, they stopped at a village to meet with the local elder. Through an interpreter, the elder explained that insurgents had been coming into the village and demanding food and shelter. The villagers were caught between the insurgents who would punish them for cooperating with the government and the government forces who would punish them for helping insurgents. It was an impossible situation. Sarah listened carefully and asked questions to understand the dynamics better. She learned that the villagers were not ideologically aligned with the insurgents. They simply wanted to survive. If the government forces could provide security and protection, the villagers would support them. But past promises had been broken and trust was gone. This conversation changed how Sarah thought about the mission. It was not just about gathering intelligence and conducting raids. It was about creating conditions where local people felt safe enough to reject the insurgents. That required a level of sustained commitment and competence that went beyond military operations. She brought these insights back to Commander Hayes and the local military leadership. Together, they developed a strategy that combined security operations with efforts to demonstrate reliability to the local population. Small teams would maintain presence in key villages. Projects would improve basic infrastructure. Most importantly, promises made would be kept. The approach began to show results over the following weeks. More villagers started providing information about insurgent movements. The intelligence allowed local forces to conduct successful operations that disrupted enemy networks. As security improved, life in the area gradually became more normal. Markets reopened. Children returned to schools. It was slow progress, but it was real. Sarah's role evolved beyond traditional intelligence analysis. She became a key link between the American team and local forces, helping translate not just language but also concepts and expectations. She developed genuine relationships with local intelligence officers who began to trust her judgment and advice. Her willingness to listen and learn rather than lecture earned respect. But success brought increased danger. The insurgents recognized that their position was weakening and responded with escalating violence. They began targeting villages that cooperated with government forces. They planted improvised explosive devices along roads used for patrols. They conducted attacks designed to terrorize the population back into submission. One morning, a massive explosion rocked the compound. Sarah was knocked off her chair by the blast. Alarms sounded and everyone scrambled to defensive positions. The compound had been hit by a vehicle-borne explosive device. The explosion had breached part of the perimeter wall. Small arms fire erupted as insurgents attempted to exploit the breach. Sarah grabbed her weapon and moved to a defensive position as she had been trained. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She could see attackers attempting to move through the breach. Local soldiers and Hayes' team engaged them with coordinated fire. The attack was fierce, but ultimately unsuccessful. The combined defensive response pushed the attackers back after intense fighting that lasted nearly an hour. When the shooting stopped, Sarah helped treat wounded local soldiers while they waited for medical evacuation. She used the combat medical training she had received, applying pressure to wounds and keeping injured men calm. Seeing the blood and pain of real combat casualties was sobering. These were not statistics in a report. They were people she had worked alongside. The attack killed 3 local soldiers and wounded several others. The compound's defenses had held, but the enemy had demonstrated they could strike at the heart of government positions. Commander Hayes called an emergency meeting with local leadership to assess the situation and plan a response. The enemy had made a strategic mistake by revealing their capability. Now the question was how to exploit that mistake. Sarah worked through the night analyzing intelligence related to the attack. She tracked the vehicle's likely route to the compound and identified several locations where it could have been prepared. She cross-referenced this with other intelligence to identify the most probable insurgent staging areas. By morning, she had developed a target list for potential operations. Hayes reviewed her analysis and nodded approvingly, but he also cautioned that they needed to be smart about the response. The enemy wanted to provoke a heavy-handed reaction that would alienate the local population. They needed to strike back effectively while maintaining the trust they had built with villagers. It was a delicate balance. The operation they planned was surgical and based on solid intelligence. Local special forces, supported by Hayes' team, would conduct simultaneous raids on 3 locations Sarah had identified. The goal was to capture insurgent leaders and disrupt their network without causing civilian casualties. Sarah would provide real-time intelligence support during the operation. The raids launched at dawn 2 days later. Sarah monitored communications and imagery from the operations center, tracking each team's progress. The operations went smoothly at 2 locations, resulting in multiple captures and significant intelligence hauls. The 3rd location turned into a firefight when insurgents resisted. But the combined force was prepared and quickly gained control. The captured insurgents included several leaders who had planned the compound attack. The intelligence materials seized revealed the structure of the insurgent network in the region. It was a major success that significantly degraded enemy capabilities. More importantly, it demonstrated to the local population that the government forces could protect them effectively. In the weeks following these operations, security in the region improved dramatically. The insurgent network struggled to recover from the losses. More villages began actively cooperating with government forces, providing information and rejecting insurgent demands. The strategy of combining security with building trust was working. Sarah's deployment entered its final months. She had been in the region for over 5 months and had seen dramatic changes. The area that had been volatile and dangerous was now relatively stable. Local forces were operating more effectively and independently. The relationships between the American team and local counterparts had become genuinely collaborative. Commander Hayes pulled Sarah aside one afternoon and told her something that surprised her. The local intelligence chief had specifically requested that Sarah be allowed to extend her deployment. He said that her contributions had been invaluable and that her departure would be a significant loss. It was an extraordinary compliment, especially coming from someone who had initially been skeptical of American involvement. Sarah was touched by the request but also exhausted. 5 months of constant operations had taken a physical and mental toll. She needed rest and time away from the stress of combat operations. She told Hayes that she appreciated the recognition, but felt it was time to rotate home. He understood and told her that she had more than fulfilled the mission requirements. As the deployment wound down, the team conducted transition briefings with the personnel who would replace them. Sarah spent hours with her replacement, walking through the intelligence picture and explaining the relationships she had built. She emphasized the importance of listening to local counterparts and respecting their knowledge. The work they had started needed to continue. The day they left, local military leadership held a small ceremony to thank the team. The intelligence chief gave Sarah a traditional gift, a handmade scarf worn by women in the region. Through an interpreter, he told her that she had proven herself as both a skilled professional and a trusted friend. His forces would remember her contributions. Sarah felt emotion welling up but maintained her composure. This mission had meant more to her than any award or recognition could capture. The flight back to the United States gave Sarah time to reflect on her journey. She thought about the uncertain young woman who had struggled through boot camp years ago. She remembered panicking in the underwater training pool and wondering if she would ever be good enough. She thought about all the moments when doubt had crept in, and the determination that pushed her forward. Now she was returning from one of the most demanding special operations deployments possible. She had worked alongside SEAL teams and earned their respect. She had made critical contributions to mission success in one of the world's most dangerous regions. She had proven to herself and others that she belonged in this elite community. When they landed, Commander Hayes gathered the team one final time. He thanked them for their professionalism, courage, and dedication. He told them they had set a standard that would influence how similar missions were conducted in the future. Then he looked at Sarah specifically and said that she had exceeded every expectation. Her journey from struggling recruit to accomplished special operations professional was an inspiration to everyone who knew her story. Sarah smiled quietly. She had not set out to inspire anyone. She had simply refused to quit when things got hard. She had pushed through fear and doubt and exhaustion. She had learned from every failure and built on every success. The real lesson was not about being exceptional. It was about being relentless in pursuit of becoming better than she was yesterday. As she walked away from that final briefing, Sarah knew that her journey was far from over. There would be new challenges and missions ahead. But she also knew that she had discovered something essential about herself. She was capable of far more than she had ever imagined. And that knowledge, earned through years of struggle and triumph, was something no one could ever take away.